so much. I'm so happy to be here talking to you all tonight. And, well, I've already gotten a little bit of background, so I don't need to go as in-depth as I was planning on it. As was mentioned, I'm a hand letterer, an illustrator, and a graphic designer. I'm currently in the process of authoring my first book with Abrams to release in spring 18. And as was mentioned, I went to Carnegie Mellon School of Design. I completed the Type at Cooper program as part of the second class, as well as most recently, I completed my master's degree at the School of Visual Arts MFA design program, which is unique in that it combines business and design. So after undergrad, I moved to New York and I started working in-house with a variety of fashion brands. I worked with J. Crew, as well as their higher-end variations, bridal collection, men's shop, their sister brand Madewell, and their children's brand Crew Cuts, and eventually moved over to Juicy Couture for a short time, where I worked with Juicy and their sister brand Bird by Juicy Couture. After leaving in-house, I transitioned to full-time freelance, which is what I do now. And I, as was mentioned, primarily work as an illustrator and a hand letterer in the mediums of graphite, ink, and watercolor. So I've worked with some great clients that were mentioned, which includes Penguin Random House and Wired, TBWA, and Milton Glaser Inc., as well as Bergdorf Goodman and Hillary for America. And much of this work, as I've said, is in hand lettering. And what I most enjoy to do in hand lettering is what I'll talk about today, which is representational lettering. And so I'll be going through 3 projects, and I'll be talking about them from project brief through final art, starting with a project from 2014, JSTOR. So JSTOR is a digital library, and they are associated with different universities as well as public libraries. And they reached out to me with the project brief that they wanted to develop a hand-lettered alphabet as well as an interpretation of their logo. So the goal of this was to bring a more youthful aesthetic to this well-established brand and draw in a bit of the younger college student crowd. They asked me to draw inspiration from categories that they cover in their library, and they sent over a lot of inspiration, including various hand lettering, different alphabets, work that they developed in-house, and what I find most helpful is my work that they like. So this tells me a lot. This tells me why they chose me, which of my mediums they're interested in, as well as the general aesthetic that they're going for. So in this case, they were obviously interested in my representational lettering work. They were interested in either graphite or pen and ink, and I felt like the right choice based on what we talked about was to go in the graphite realm. And there's a bit of a vintage-inspired and or playful type of vibe going on. So we also talked about how their primary font is News Gothic, and what they'd like to do with the alphabet is to create words with it. And they consider themselves to be both digital and analog. So this led to the final concept, particularly for the alphabet, which was layering the analog illustrations over top of their digital font to bring it all together. So to break it down, library plus digital technology plus analog at heart equals an academic logo and alphabet. And so I started off doing a lot of visual research and rough sketches, which then turned into these client sketches. And I emailed them out to the client. And it came back with only 13 of the 26 characters selected, which obviously I did not hit the nail on the head. They felt that the idea was getting a little too young, which brings up an interesting challenge that as soon as you pair alphabet and academics, it can easily slip into grade school. So this was a really interesting challenge for me, that I'd have to elevate the art and find a way to make it more college level. I also developed some approaches to the logo. The original logo is very complex, so my instinct was to give it an overall theme and to try to simplify a bit. So the first option I presented was carved stone and ivy, which is a more literal interpretation of the original logo. And the second one is a fossilized version of their logo. And I have to admit, I really did like both of these options. Unfortunately, they did not. They felt that it was a bit too young, same with the alphabet, and they thought maybe it should match more to the alphabet and do the layering of digital and analog. So it was time to go back to the drawing board and do a lot more visual research, which then turned into second round sketches. And I really pushed a new focus, which was more advanced themes. So instead of, say, a globe, I went with architectural drawings. And I wanted to push a more graphic visual as well as dimension to really try to bring the level up to college level. And I sent this out to the client, which was a lot more successful. The feedback was minimal. They wanted me to reconsider the C, reconsider the L, and they also decided that they wanted to move forward with not just any version of News Gothic, they wanted it to specifically be bold condensed, which I'd actually specifically selected the wider version because it worked better with the images that overlapped it. I always try with my representational lettering to have it be very natural, almost like the art is just falling into the shape of a letter. So these sharper angles are definitely going to be a challenge when moving forward into final art. And I developed 2 more versions of the logo. I did one version that merges the 3 of the topics from the alphabet together on top of the digital, vector version of the logo, as well as a variation that is like a computer chip sort of feeling. And I have to admit, I was more excited about the computer chip version, but the client chose option 1, c'est la vie. And so it does match better with the alphabet, so I can understand their feeling. So, you just go with it. And they came back with 2 main pieces of feedback. They wanted to bring the gears down a bit so that they are interacting with the store part of the logo a bit more, and they wanted to see it in color. A lot of times clients won't be able to visualize those details, and they want to just really nail down what the look is going to be in advance. So I went back and I developed a few more C's and a few more L's, and I sent them off to the client, and they went with the gear C and the computer chip L and gave the thumbs up to move into final art. I also sent over an adjusted version of the logo with 2 different colorways so they could start to get a sense of how it could look if they did go with their kind of reds and tans and white sort of combination. And they were happy with it. They said that we could move forward. So I moved into completing the final logo art, hand drawing it and retouching it, and they were happy with this. Whereas, as I've said, I have to admit, although I do think it pairs well with the final alphabet, it was a little bit disappointing. It was not my favorite direction. But I also completed the final alphabet art, and they were also happy with this, whereas I was too. And a big lesson for a project like this, for me, I found that going through a challenging sketch round tends to really lead to less issues and possibly even no issues with final art. And in this case, there were no issues, so I'm happy to do a lot of back and forth in sketch round. It saves time and money in the long run for everyone and is a lot smoother. So I tend to actually encourage that with clients. And they chose to display this art in black and white, whereas I, on the other hand, felt like it looked really fun in color. And I kind of loved how it's just more youthful, and how if you do it as 2 tones, they layer, creating a third. And when getting into the details, I worked really hard to condense the images, the illustrations in a really natural way to fit with the final font choice. I also was careful with how I intersected the art over the letter forms so that it felt harmonious. And I worked to really refine the details of the texture and all of the line art to really enhance the illustrations. And that's the type of thing that really makes the project feel like my own, when it's very detailed. And so JSTOR decided to use this on their website, as well as on a poster, and develop this into a college-focused campaign. So moving on to the next project, which is from 2015, with Barnard Magazine, or Barnard College's magazine, Barnard Magazine. So Barnard is a women's college associated with Columbia University. And the brief that they sent over was that it's their 125th anniversary. And one way that they wanted to celebrate this was through their magazine covers. And they'd already completed their fall, winter, and spring cover. And they wanted to move forward with working with me on the summer cover themed Barnard in Bloom. So they sent over a lot of reference. It was really important to them to have each cover highlighting their gates. They really felt like that was an iconic part of their university, that's what people know them for. They also sent over these floral meets type images, which I have to say I was really excited about. For me, everything else was black and white, and this is like my excuse to make it colorful. So I was in. And they sent images of my work. These graphite and pen and ink sort of options were referencing how they imagined me approaching the gates. And the watercolor work that they sent over was how they imagined me some references for the flowers. And I could really visualize all of this, so I was really excited to get going. And all of this really told me, so obviously it's representational lettering of 125, mashed up with illustration of flowers. And then it's mixed media, it's watercolor meets, it could be pen and ink or graphite, but I really felt like the right choice was to go with graphite again for this project. And the vibe is bright, it's bold, it's contrasty. So to break it down, college plus iconic gates plus flowers equals cover lettering. And I did a first round of sketches. All the covers before this were very literally gates. So I thought it might be nice to make it a bit more abstract and to go with more of like a dimensional feel to give an essence of the gates. And because color was so important, I threw in color and sent this off to the client. They came back with 3 pieces of feedback. One, they were concerned about the readability of 125 and wanted me to reconsider the arrangement of the numerals. They felt like maybe I'd gone a little too wild with color, and to bring it back a little, just like focusing in on maybe blues, purples, reds, pinks, and get rid of a few of the other colors. And then more decorative, their gates are very decorative, and they wanted it to get a little closer to that decorative nature. So I went back in and did a second sketch round, and again, I colored it because I just felt like that was very necessary to really convey my ideas to the client. And they selected option 2. They felt that this option really started to get at the feeling of the gates. The main piece of feedback that they had was that they thought it was still a little abstract, and they wanted me to really look at the details of the gates and get a little more of the actual gate sort of shapes in, which I'd only been working in thumbnail up to this point, so it seemed like the right time to switch to a full-sized sketch of the piece and really focus in on getting the exact details of shapes that are in the real gates, which the client loved and approved, and we were ready to go. So I drew and retouched the numerals. I painted and I retouched the flowers and the masthead, and I digitally merged everything. I sent this off to the client. They loved it. They approved it. Everything was good to go, and I started working on the spot illustration for the table of contents. I'm sure this is the point when you're thinking I'm going to say, and this magazine cover lived happily ever after. But no, plot twist. It turns out that the president of the university had not seen the cover up until this moment, and he felt that flowers did not represent the university. Ivy did. So he wanted a whole new cover, as it goes. So this was the moment where the rep came in and discussed budget. We came to an agreement and we were ready to move forward, new cover for the president. And they still wanted to move forward with this Barnard and Bloom theme, although at this point I've already renamed it in my head Barnard and Ivy. But they discovered apparently Ivy has flowers and we are going to incorporate them into the cover. So, and they sent over a comp trying to portray this new idea. So they wanted me to reuse the numerals, and they wanted me to place them on top of the gate and make the gate out of ivy. I personally felt like this was, a little disjointed, a little confusing. So I sent over this sketch along with an email that explained why it does not work. And I said, the perspective's weird, it's confusing conceptually, I just think we need a clean slate, I don't think we should recycle art, and thank goodness they agreed. So I moved on to a follow-up sketch where I reinterpreted the gates, incorporating the 1, 2, 5 within them, and I incorporated the ivy around it and added in their ivy flowers. And I sent this off to the client, and they were much happier with it. We both were. The main piece of feedback was just more ivy. So I moved forward, and we decided to do a background color for this version of the cover, and so I painted the background, I hand drew and I retouched the gate art, and I painted and I retouched the ivy and magazine masthead art, and I merged them together, and I sent this off to the client, and they were very happy. Minor feedback, it was just punching up the colors in the ivy and pushing back the background tone a bit, so voila, and it was approved. And I, again, went into completing a little spot illustration for the table of contents and ended up with 2 covers, a cover series for my portfolio. So I have to admit, I like the first cover a bit better. It's a little more abstract, a little more interesting to me. But with time, I've come to appreciate them both. So then moving on to my final project from 2016, I was approached by the Swedish advertising agency, Garbergs, to develop lettering for a series of pop-up events. They sent over this image and explained that Jernhausen, a company that owns and runs various buildings, including railway stations, attached to the Swedish rail network, wanted to celebrate local farmers that ship their goods via train. And to do this, they wanted to host a series of farmers markets in 2 of the central stations in Sweden, and do this over the next 2 years. They also sent this mood board, and so it was time for my rep to negotiate the job. And she suggested that we do an alphabet in comparison to lots of different individual bits of lettering. And we agreed to 26 letters of the English alphabet plus 2 Swedish characters, so 28 characters so far. And so to break it down, Sweden plus farmer's market plus the fall equals a food alphabet. And I have to say, I have never been to Sweden. I have no clue what they sell in their farmer's markets. And to be as specific as the fall, I cannot tell you. So this was the time to do research because the details are so important to me. So I did a lot of visual research. And I didn't want to, just pick a cheese. I wanted it to be like a Swedish cheese with a Swedish name type of thing. So it was that detailed. And it turned into rough sketches, which then turned into more refined client sketches. And I sent these off to the client for review. And both my Swedish rep and the client were really happy. I think they really liked the detail I put into the food choices. And, oh, sorry. Yeah. The detail I put into the food choices, and they liked that I used some Swedish words in there. So they came back with minor feedback. They wanted me to they liked both of the Ps I had suggested, but they felt like when they made their final selects, neither P quite fit in, so they wanted to just see some P options, and they wanted to add another Swedish accent to help them in the design process. So 28 letters is now 29. And so I have one more P to create. So I'm wondering, well, is there a Swedish food that I don't know about that is important to them that I'm missing? So I should check with the client and see if they have any suggestions. Well, they came back with this. And if you don't know, this is a giant blueberry pea. So I wasn't completely convinced that this was the best direction. I felt like maybe the scale's a little off. We'd already selected blueberries for the H, so I decided to make further suggestions at this point. A lot of them. I thought it was very important to find a good alternative to this P. And I suggested an apple option because it had a similar feeling to the blueberry, but at a better scale. A rose hip option because it's a little berry-like and has beautiful shapes. Ginger because it has beautiful shapes as well. The cheese and the egg direction because we'd actually not selected any dairy so far, so to add some more variation. As well as the honey because I just thought it was a little different and could be really beautiful. And they came back very quickly. They liked the rose hip, so moving forward. And we were moving into what is the first of 2 rounds of final art at this point. They needed their title art completed first so that they can get moving on the design process. And so referencing the sketches, I hand drew and retouched the letters, and I digitally colored them and sent this off to the client. They came back with 2 pieces of feedback. One was about the blood pudding D. As you can imagine, it can be hard to create a blood pudding D that's really clearly blood pudding without writing a giant blood pudding label across it. So I understood where they were coming from, and although I put a lot of effort into the different textures trying to get this right feeling, I knew what they meant when they were questioning it, and they thought we should switch it to cheese. So ideally, I would be redrawing a specific cheese and reusing the art, but the time and the money was not on our side for this particular D. So we decided to test out just recoloring it, which actually I thought worked quite well. I was surprised, and I think these new tones really worked well with the title as a whole. And speaking of in an ideal world, I don't really like for titles to have duplicate letters. Apparently the double A did not bother them, but the triple R did. So we discussed additional budget, and they were able to afford 2 more R's. So the 29 characters turned into a final 31 characters for this project done. And they liked my piece so much, and it just worked out really well, that they just said base the 2 R's off of the P's, do an egg version and a honey version. So we were ready to move forward and get into the second phase of final art, where I drew and retouched the rest of the alphabet for them, and I digitally colored it. And we ended up with this detailed alphabet, which actually each letter is huge. It's like bigger than my head because they had to be used for various things like banners and posters and signs, so massive undertaking. And I really took a lot of time on the details and the textures of each character because that's something that I really think is important. And I played with this new coloring technique that I had come up with, so I was really excited that it turned out quite well, I thought. And this all built complexity into the final art. So the alphabet was approved by the client without changes. And some clients write to thank you and say that the art is beautiful, whereas others just get to work. And so I found out that sorry, brain fart. I found out the client will I found out that the clients will get back to you super fast when there's a problem. And so, although it sounds a little strange, it's kind of a good sign when you don't hear anything. And in this case, it was radio silence until I started to get images of my art in use. And I got to see it in advertising posters and how they looked on the street, as well as images of the event poster that they put up into the station, and decals for doors in the stations, as well as signage to hang in central locations to advertise the event, and a look at the first farmers market that they did, including how the alphabet looked in different items incorporated into the farmers market, like shopping bags. So for me, this project was a great success. I was really happy with how my art turned out, and I was really happy with how they used it, which in combination is a challenge to find. So over the years, my creative process has certainly evolved. I try to make changes to different stages in the process to prevent past issues from reoccurring. And as much as you try to control everything in the project, clients will find a way to throw in that twist. So I've learned for me to really enjoy the process, I've had to develop a flexible mind, and this has allowed me to be more and more successful with these twists as they come my way. Thank you so much. I guess questions. Yes?
What is the duration of each project? How long
They vary greatly. You know, one client is like, we have a week, and then the next client, it's like they have multiple months. So it really...
Okay, but especially when it is A to Z, all the alphabets?
I need at least 2 weeks probably to sketch, and then probably 3 more, ideally, to get through final art. It depends on if they keep adding letters.
You said that you, in this particular case, you were happy with the last project, that you were happy with both the art and then how it was used, and that sometimes that can be a challenge to get both of those things.
Yeah.
Is there like is it common that you're happy with the art and then you see it out in the world and it's not exactly how you imagined, or?
Yeah, I guess being happy with the art sounds like patting myself on the back, but you know, in the scheme of things, I will send something out feeling like this is the best I could do in this time slot. I feel like solid about it, like I'll put everything I can into it in that time. So then there's a certain amount of I ask a lot of questions to try to make sure that I'm tailoring it perfectly to the design. So when you come back with things, recolored or askew or cropped differently, it can be challenging to find your peace with that at times. So yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. It's really beautiful work.
Thank you.
And just open it up to smaller discussion. I have a feeling that a lot of people want to talk to you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.